they're still here, for this beautiful room. And also want to say thank you to Jackie for having set this up. This is a project which began just before Christmas last year, when Jackie self-confessed to knowing nothing about planning, and now she's an expert leading the charge. So it's very cool, and I have to say it's very exciting to see actual community members, as opposed to professionals who are usually too frightened to say anything, are saying things in public about this stuff. When I wrote Killing Sydney, my publisher said, you can't call it that. That's too negative. But I wish I was publishing it now. Anyway, look, so let me just... Sydney has to densify, we know that. It's given. We have, however, the models for doing that well. They already exist in Sydney. They're not ugly and they're not unaffordable. It's not difficult. We have DNA in Sydney's building stock, like King's Cross, like Surrey Hills, like the warehouse developments, the old stuff in Marrickville. There's lots of good models for doing density better. Indeed, I think it's interesting and obvious that the most desirable and sought after parts of Sydney are actually the most dense. Given that how far and how hard most people fight against density, that's kind of ironic. But I think the reason is that we mostly now do it so badly. So the triple crises on this screen, the triple crises facing our cities, are interesting only in the sense that city making sits at the heart of, or the sort of overlap of, climate crisis, housing affordability, and our sense of trust in government. And the way those things together and the way we respond in the habitat that we make, I think will determine our future. I think it's obvious for environmental reasons, but also for affordability, walkability, lively neighbourhoods, vital streets, and also combating urban loneliness, that we need to make things denser. So really it's all about how we choose to do that. The current model of densification gives us a choice between this, which is current development in, as it happens, Marsden Park, but it's very common on the outer fringes of Sydney, as many of you might know. Black roofs so close together that no trees will ever grow. At the same time, we have developments like this, which is happens to be East Gardens, but again could be almost anywhere across our metropolis, across our suburbs. So there's high-rise cookie cutter and low-rise cookie cutter, both of which are equally unpleasant and unlovable. And ironically still car dependent. So even though we increase the density, all of the benefits that should accrue from increasing density, like more interesting streets, more walkability, don't occur because the places that we make are so unpleasant to walk around. So no one does it. We have good models. This is a recent development in Surrey Hills, Traces, it's called, a little apartment building. There's one in, this is Wentworth Park. There's another little one which is a personal favourite actually in the UK, but it's a result of a citizens' assembly which was run weirdly by the developer in Cambridge in the UK. It's called Marmalade Lane. Much loved little development. So there are lots of ways of doing this in a way that quadruples or more, quintuples the development density, which still makes people's lives better and more enjoyable. We don't have to make things ugly. This is one in Queensland called Trias, by Trias, called Dappled Dwellings. Our governments, however, are taking us in pretty much the exact opposite direction of any of these. This is a diagram from a book called Soft City, which is a lovely collection of ideas about how to make cities more dense but also more lovable. And it's worth having a look if you feel like reading up on it. But in fact, what our governments are doing is destroying the sense of shared vitality in the public spaces that we live in together. We have this low and medium rise policy, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and we also have all the TOD demarcations, this policy, the map across, this isn't even all of Sydney, but the brown bits, I'm going to call them coffee coloured because I don't want to be rude. My grandson tells me that toilet humour is not acceptable. So, but you can see how much of Sydney this covers. Almost all of the older bits of Sydney and almost all of the already denser bits of Sydney are covered by this low and medium rise housing, which should mean low and medium rise, but actually in the way that it's couched, because of the 30% increase you can get for a mere 15% of so-called affordable housing, it really ends up at 8.5 stories, which means that developers all presume that 9 stories is there as of right, and that's where they begin. So it ends up meaning 9 stories is very different from 4 stories. I'm sure we all know that, but somehow the government hasn't worked it out. You can see there's Bondi Junction, Surrey Hills, Double Bay, King's Cross, all covered, nearly all of those areas covered by this blanket rezoning, which means that things, and this is the terrible irony of it, that existing affordable housing is knocked down for luxury apartments, because those, broadly speaking, are the most desirable bits with the most expensive land, where people, developers, can and choose to buy the most expensive sites and build very expensive apartments. So we get a net loss. That's a terrible irony, that we stand to generate all of this destruction across Sydney without actually any of the yield, any of the lovability or affordability that should come out of such loss. There are a number of reasons for this. I think one is there are many different, 2 in particular, different definitions of affordable, both of which figure in government policy and legislation. One says this, you can see Lancome there, which relates it to a percentage of existing market rates. 75% or 80% is often used, discount of at least 20% to market rent. So that, in most places, covered by those brown bits that you see, that will not be anything like affordable for the people who need that assistance, teachers, firemen, and so on. There's another definition which says that, which relates it to gross income of the family, and that's completely different. That is housing that is defined, which is managed by a community housing provider, and there's a complex formula which relates how much rent people pay to what they can afford. So you can see that those are 2 completely different things. One is likely to be affordable for actual people, one is almost certain not to be. And of course, developers tend to prefer the other definition, which just means they have to drop it a bit below the market. There's another problem, which is that developers are free to choose whatever sites they want to develop, even for affordable housing, and so they always choose the most expensive sites because that's where they can build luxury units, and waterfront sites everywhere, but also Willara, also Double Bay. All of those sites are being cherry-picked by developers as we speak. I'm sure you are familiar with how that is panning out at the moment. The third thing is that the market is almost infinite. If you don't restrict the foreign purchases or the number of dwellings that a person can own, clearly you can go on increasing so-called supply until the cows come home, and it's not going to make any difference to affordability, because houses are not like bananas. There's not a limited appetite and they don't go off. So it's a completely different dynamic. Furthermore, the self-regulation of the free market that we adhere to so strictly, and I think so extravagantly, means that if prices do drop, developers stop building, of course. They're not going to build into a market where they're not going to make money that they expect, or make it stack up in their terms. So clearly, if there is any affordability coming, it's going to be inhibited by that particular practice. And then the last reason is regulation. In the end, housing affordability is not a planning issue, it's about financial regulation. And I think, again, we all know that. It's really evident if you talk to any scholar in the field. They know that what we need is tax reform, we need an end to negative gearing, and so on. So increasing supply in the way that we're attempting to do with all of this rezoning is never going to solve the problem in the way that we expect. And that means that, as I said, Sydney stands to destroy much of what it loves about itself, of what we love about it, without achieving any of the desired benefits. And that, I think, is a bit of a tragedy. So it's a sort of a moral issue, really, because, of course, in the end, it's political. We all want affordability for our kids and grandchildren, but none of us want our property prices to fall. That means all of us are in a conflict of interest situation. So the politicians, it's not even the politicians' fault, really. It's the fact that this is a difficult conundrum for all of us, and it means that this is essentially a moral problem for everybody. It's also, however, an environmental, social and aesthetic issue. The rules that we have at the moment, Jackie will recognise this because this is in her street, knocking down 3-4 houses for this luxury apartment building. But this could be anywhere, so we get this bland, anonymous architecture with no sense of local character. We get perfectly nasty streets out of this super high density and high-rise development. You can imagine what the streets are like at the bottom of these buildings. They're shaded and windswept and miserable feeling. So encouraging the kind of street life that we want, or the kind of walkability, just doesn't happen. And there's also the, coming back to the net loss of affordability. This is Potts Point. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, and it's not the highest or the worst offender, but it is again a typical pattern of replacing smaller, often more affordable apartments with fewer, bigger, super luxury apartments blessed with several bedrooms and remarkable views, which means that all of the people, for example, in the Cross, who have traditionally lived there, all of the kind of local bohemian colour that makes the Cross so delicious, will disappear. And also, those people will have nowhere to live. Some councils have chosen to sidestep the government rezoning reforms by what I call sacrificial zoning, which is essentially meant, I'm not going to name them because you know who you are, but essentially means heaping all of the density that's required onto one or two smaller areas in order to basically save the property of the majority, which I think points to the weakness, one of the weaknesses of democracy as we practice it, because the minority, the 20%, say, of the people whose houses get knocked down for super high rise, doesn't get a voice. What would be a better outcome would be a better process, really, and this is the Better Cities Initiative, which I have set up, has been proposing, amongst other things, this different process, which is a way of randomly selecting a number of participants, giving them a clear question to consider, like, how should we do this density better, giving them a lot of time, paying them for their time, and facilitating the outcome to generate a genuine citizen's voice. It seems to me that there's a need for real dialogue, not just for governments telling us what they think, and not just for them sending expensive consultants out into the streets to take surveys, which they then put in the bin. I think it's really important that all of us rise up to defend the city that we love and to formulate a genuine citizen voice, which is why I'm very happy that Jackie has set up Doing Density Better to represent and to articulate a thoughtful and, I think, wiser community voice that to put to government and to put to developers to say, you know what's a better way of doing it? This. I'm going to stop there, but thank you very much.